to, we're low tech here this evening, so council members and staff, if you could make sure that your microphone light is lit, particularly when you go to speak tonight. We had a piece of equipment fail that controls our nice projector up on top, so we've got a low tech solution that we've improvised on, and let's see here. I guess that's it. Did I miss anything, Brandy? Just make sure your microphones are lit so we can. Yes, you can't. Oh, and this TV screens won't work. I'm sorry. So, but we've got repairs on the way. So our second order of business is a council photo. Was a council photo tonight, but Mr. Clausen's away on business, so we won't be doing that tonight. And so we're to the approval of the agenda. Are there any amendments to this evening, Mr. Kachardi?
Yeah, Mayor, I'd like to add 5D under the consent agenda to excuse Councilmember Clausen. He's away on business this evening.
Second.
A motion and a second to add Mr. Clausen's excusal to the consent agenda. Further discussion of that? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, Mr. Clausen's been excused, or added to the consent agenda to be excused. Any other additions to the agenda this evening?
No, Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the agenda as amended. Further discussion of the agenda? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Agenda is approved. We are to our first citizen comment period, which is for anything that is on this evening's agenda. Is anyone wishing to comment this evening? Mr. Murphy? Please identify yourself for everyone else.
I'm Matt Murphy from the Port Orchard Chamber of Commerce, and I can't see that over there, so that's so cool. I was coming in today and ran into Councilman Chang there, all spiffed up, and we were talking about, I recently went to the boat show over in Seattle 2 weeks ago, and I didn't get a boat, but it was an enlightening trip in that, the walk from the ferry landing to CenturyLink Field is an adventure sometimes. And it's interesting to see, even in Seattle, every block has 2 or 3 vacant buildings. Port Orchard is not that different than the rest of the world, the state. In Bremerton last week, I discovered that my driver's license was up, and so I went over to the driver's license place over there, and that's in Rydell and 30 Wheaton Way, whatever that is there. And that entire shopping center is virtually empty. So I'm here today just to get back to the agenda point here, is this presentation that we've got coming up. And, we're not filling up, but we're filling up the areas in downtown and hopefully in the rest of Port Orchard. I think, anything that we can do to support the proposal tonight and any project that comes in under the multi-use pilot program, I think is great, and it will go a long ways in hopefully bringing us up with better than the rest of the world. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Murphy. Anyone else wishing to address the council for anything on the agenda this evening? We have a second citizen comment period at the end of the meeting also. So, all right, I'll close the citizen comment period. We are on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda
Second.
as presented.
As amended.
Already amended, now as presented.
Okay.
So, motion a second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. The consent agenda is approved. We are on to our presentation. Mr. Siegel, is that you? Mr. Rice? If you could identify yourselves, and Brandy will turn on the machine, and maybe Scott, could you hit the down button on that screen?
That works. That works.
That still works.
Are you going to?
she'll hand you a pointer here in a moment. So as soon as, I'll introduce you as soon as Brandy's got,
I see.
So I hope everyone is aware, now that we got this loaded up, that the city put out a request for proposals on our 640 Bay Street property that it owns down on the waterfront. And we recently closed that process. And we had one proposal. We're thankful for that one proposal that we have. And with the microphone here this evening is Steve Seago from Waterman Investment Partners, and standing to his right is Steve Rice from Rice Fergus Miller Architects. So with that, I'll let you talk a little bit about your project, and then the council may have some questions for you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Patansu. Tonight we're going to do a quick review of a more substantial proposal that we submitted in response to an RFP that was circulated in November of last year, and that we submitted in December, January through a process with the city and staff. And we're here tonight to talk a little bit about that, share some concepts that we have included in the proposal, and then answer some of your questions as we go forward. First, I want to introduce the team that is part of this project, and it, as Rob described, I'm with Waterman Investment Partners, and Mr. Rice is with RFM Architects, Rice Fergus Miller. We also have with us Wes Larson from SWG back here, and Robert Baglio with BJC Group from this is the construction piece and the development piece. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention another part of our team, my wife, Corinne Haydock. Sorry. I don't say that. I haven't said that very often yet, so just getting used to it. So what I want to do is go through kind of the process of how we put this together, and we took the RFP and addressed what we believe we completely addressed all the components, requirements, and stipulations included in the RFP, and we had some latitude about whether or not we wanted to engage in the mixed-use pilot program as part of this process, and we do, and we'll explain that as well. But we wanted to, again, accommodate the objective of creating this mixed-use project, the residential, retail, and public use objectives that were described, and include the draft design guidelines that you folks are in the middle of reviewing and hopefully coming to conclusion on in the months ahead as part of this process. And we wanted to create the highest and best use for that parcel as the RFP has suggested, and start the beginning, hopefully, of many adventures to come of folks who are willing to invest in our downtown, in our community, and see the benefit for that. And this is hopefully the first step in that. And we also wanted to make certain that we explored the highest opportunities, the best opportunities to include pedestrian and public space amenities as part of this proposal. And finally, most importantly, in terms of making this all work, it's got a pencil. And so we wanted to make sure that we address the financial considerations so that if our team agreed to move forward with our investors, that we, at the end of the day, had at least $1 left in the bank. So we tried to make that work, and we think we've done that. So with that, I'm going to turn this over in a moment to Mr. Rice and let him address some of the design concepts as we go through this. But for reference, this is the parcel location. Frederick, you know exactly where it is because you can almost see it out the window here. But it is a site that right now is vacant and is starving to be used for something useful in our downtown corridor. So Steve, why don't you, I'm going to scroll through to this first screen, or this first slide, and describe some of the thoughts that went into this.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Council, for the opportunity tonight. Is this beautiful red thing a pointer?
That's
Okay. Do we have a pointer, Randy?
Will this work as a pointer? Yes. There you go.
Thank you. What we call thoughts and features. Anytime we're working on a site, especially in an urban context, we want to take stock of what's around us and what the opportunities are. These are sort of on a grander scale outside the site, and that always lends a more rich solution, we think. And I won't point out all of these, but the project site sits on Bay and on Prospect both. And so there's really 3 fronts to this building if you include Frederick, and each of those is done thoughtfully based on its aspect on the site. We'd like to do a softer, more green approach on the face of the site that points uphill, which is primarily residential. And we'd like to do a little harder, more urban scape on the Main Street Bay, and of course on the hill climb. This is very cozy and lots of ins and outs, and that should feel a little bit like a European street. That's backwards, sorry. So the building is a 5-story structure, the top 4 of which are residential. It contains 44 apartment units that range in size from studio units. They're in the minority in this case. 1 bedrooms, which are in the majority in this case, and a couple of larger units that would grace the top floor. There's a setback up here and some broader glass, and of course the views from up there are pretty incredible. We want a very urban streetscape here on Bay. Like other buildings along Bay, we want to distinguish between the users, and in this case there are 2 tenant spaces, assuming that both of these follow along, but we try and give voice to tenants, and so depending on what they are, if we know up front, we do our best to do that. And in this case, with the library, we want to do something special there. We have a little theme for some book bays on Bay Street that would end up being reading nooks on the street, something to express the fact that it's a library in more obvious ways than signage. The hill climb here, as you see, involves steps and landscape planting, a little easier to see when we get to the site plan. You see that we're trying to articulate a base, a cap, and then a midsection, and we do that with the change in materiality, setbacks, some bays over here. It's an interesting site, and it's an interesting place to work because Port Orchard hasn't had a preponderance of new construction. So there's not a new and modern context. There's a rich historical context, and our approach here is to approach a site like this with a progressive building using progressive and modern building techniques, but do some things that help it fit in with Port Orchard's history of small-scale buildings, many of which are made out of wood and painted. The design guidelines give us the freedom to both respect history and propose something new. And so therein lies the challenge of any design: is can you do that well? And so conceptually, we think this begins to make a pretty strong statement. At the top of the hill climb, it's kind of interesting. The shipyard crane is in direct view along the line of Frederick. This gives you some idea of what the residential side might start to feel like. The apartment entry, right here. So wrapping around the corner, it's nice, I think, that all of the apartment floors enter and exit through the Prospect corner, the upper corner, and we want to activate that corner on the hill climb with the lobby. We don't want to put it over in the middle of a facade someplace. That's a very important corner. It deserves to be active. Same thing, but elevated just a little bit, so you get a little bit more of a flavor of what possibly Frederick might start to feel like. The building has good articulation, not too many things. Most apartments these days do have decks. If they don't have decks, they have, in this case, we're showing some bays on the studios. People like to be able to get outside in their unit, and of course, over on the Bay Street side, some quite generous ones, and just the start of, conceptually how we might start to treat that front yard on Prospect. This one I think is mostly about numbers. I won't go through. You have that in front of you, but there's an accounting there of the unit mix, the average square foot size for those units, a total residential square footage, the commercial square footage, and then an accounting of the common areas. And all told, this is about a 55,000 square foot project. The site plan, just a few things maybe that I haven't yet mentioned. We'd like to see the hill climb be as active as possible. These things need reasons to attract people. So starting at the top, we have sort of a lookout here. I've already kind of explained that. I think that could have some sort of a telescope or something in it that's fixed on the horizon. Moving down just a level, we're planning something like a gathering space on the hill climb that the library could use as an outpost, or could be booked by anybody, whether it's impromptu or otherwise, for small activities. The library could use it as a program area for children when the weather is nice. Down here, if there is indeed a bistro or restaurant on the corner, we'd like to see if maybe we could incorporate some seasonal outdoor tables, some larger gathering tables for family style dining. And, that would be really great. The worst thing that we can do is ignore the fact that hill climbs need people, because cars have been omitted. So we have to find ways to keep them activated and exciting, and that way they stay safe. So I think that's...
Yeah, and before we start with questions and answers, I'm going to bring my colleagues up as well. So Wes and Robert, why don't you come on up? Just address a couple of points for your consideration. We make reference to the library and to a restaurant.
We can turn the lights back on if we could.
Both of those have been explored, and there's no contract or commitment. There is interest, and I'll address parking as well in a moment. All those issues are really predicated on if we do move forward, us having control, if you will, of the site to be able to have those kind of discussions in detail. But we have had very constructive discussions with the Kitsap County Regional Library, and with an interesting, very exciting prospective restaurant owner downtown. And then the parking, we've looked at multiple options. This proposal does not include on-site parking for the project, but it has options for immediate vicinity. I'm talking feet, not yards away, but 100 feet, 50 feet, 150, 200 feet, depending upon the option for parking. But again, until we have the ability to move forward and discuss in detail the options with a potential partner, we really can't make those kind of commitments until we have that under our belt. So that'll probably be part of the questions you'll have later as well. But I want to make sure that my colleagues here, Wes Larson with SWG and Robert Baglio with BJC Group, can have an opportunity to answer any of your questions as well, because they've been a part of this since the beginning and helped put together the pro forma, the planning, the construction model, along with Steve and I when it came to the design components. So with that said, if there are any questions, please fire away.
Questions? Mr. Chang?
We are at a disadvantage because we haven't seen the actual proposal, but I think these highlights are great. These are very exciting. I guess one question that comes up is this proposal dependent on Frederick being vacated?
Well, the RFP actually suggested or recommended that. So we
Yes.
built the proposal around that assumption, because that was what the RFP requested.
So this evening, we're getting a presentation, and the action item tonight really is acknowledging and accepting this proposal as the winning proposal of the request for proposals. And then later this evening, the action item is really just to authorize me to negotiate the details in the agreement that would be brought back to the city council for approval. But at this point, it's just, sharing the concepts in the project, answering questions you may have about the proposal, and then we've got an action item, later in the agenda that would authorize me to start those negotiations. So it's difficult for them to negotiate parking or potential leases until the developer controls the site. Other questions?
I do have a question. What do you see as a proposed timeline? Rough, very rough.
Well, the RFP has I think it's a 30-month performance obligation. Isn't that correct, Nick? Is it 30 months?
That's my recollection.
Yeah. So we included in the proposal a prospective timeline, which is fairly aggressive, but the objective is to try to get a permit by this summer. And realistically, depending upon all the other pieces coming together, the tenants and the parking, that we'd have probably about a year from this summer before we could begin construction, maybe this year from the spring. And Robert, you want to speak to that at all in terms of the permitting timeline, or does that cover it for you? Or?
I guess just to go ahead and reiterate, obviously planning is going to be important. This is just preliminary conceptual, so it's going to take a little bit to obviously put the entire plan together, go through permitting, and obviously building coming out of the ground during the drier summer months is optimum time frame as well as cost. So with that in mind, we're anticipating the 2019 springtime as far as breaking ground, which makes sense and gives us enough time to go ahead, do the appropriate planning and permitting to get everything in line and in place.
Yeah, and I'll add, there's a phase 1 environmental that's been completed, but there's still a checklist for us too to make certain that additional environmental work, a little bit has to be done, a little hole digging to kind of make certain we don't have any surprises. But I'll also share that as far as the timing goes, I mean, it's driven by other factors as well in terms of whether or not we have the finance team that's ready to go now maybe is shifting. It all depends upon those pieces as well. But we have this 30-month window. We expect to move as quickly as appropriate or practicable.
Thank you. Mr. Diener?
So for my context, or perhaps others' context, what is the current size of the existing library in terms of square footage?
That would be a
I was going to say less than 9,000, 8,500.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, not to put Steve on the spot, but Mr. Rice has been a part of some of the work for KRL on their other projects, including the Kingston project, and so he has a pretty good sense of space management or expectations. Isn't that correct? I can speak on your behalf. Or?
Yeah, we did have a preliminary meeting with the library system as part of this proposal, and they'd actually like it a little bit bigger, but somewhere between 8.5 and 10,500 feet is sort of ideal for the branch library model that they have in mind. Their new Kingston library is 5,500 and sort of driven by the Kingston Village Green. The planned library in Silverdale is about 11.
Thank you.
And Wes, do you want to add anything too about your role and so far how you see this project unfolding?
Well, I think Port Orchard, downtown Port Orchard, is just kind of a continuation of what we've done as a developer. We're active on Bainbridge Island with Bainbridge Landing, which is a waterfront, 114 units, 18 townhomes, 1 block from the ferry terminal. That's about halfway through construction. So come up on Bainbridge, you'll see the crane. Downtown Paulsbo, we've acquired most of Front Street. We're actively redeveloping, building on what's there currently to improve upon and enhance the character of Little Norway, but create some more opportunities to, as we've talked about, activate the streetscape. And Bremerton, downtown Bremerton, obviously. Spyglass Hill, we developed, constructed, demonstrating the demand for what Steve is proposing here. We leased up and occupied 80 units in 87 days. at really record rates. So, you know, this is it's great timing. It's what downtown Port Orchard, exactly the type of project that downtown Port Orchard needs. And I'm confident that if we're able to get it built, that it'll be very successful.
And I want to add one thing relative to the question about timing too, and Robert addressed the design process. You know, we looked at this blank slate, the footprint, and started conceptualizing. And I said we. Steve did a great job, and his team did a great job. But part of that discussion too was this is our first proposal, if you will. As we get into this a little bit more, it may be adjusted. For example, the library may want to go farther back towards Prospect at the ground floor, or so the unit count may go from 44 to 51. But it's in that range of that use and that size of building. Nothing really will change other than just some tweaking of the design, and we get into the next phase.
Other questions? Mr. Lucarelli?
In Bremerton, with the Spyglass, is parking provided on site?
Yes, it is. Yeah, we have 106 spaces under building parking. But when you say on-site parking too, when Steve's talking about within 50 feet, it's a big site. So this is, the building is contained on site, but if you were to have a parking adjacent to or very close to the project, it would probably, for all intents and purposes, be the same. I mean, you're walking to the building.
With what's being proposed right now, how many parking spaces would you usually need to provide?
Well, usually we like to see one space per unit at least, and with some overflow, so you'd like to see that. In the ideal world, we have a project in Seattle on East Lake, North Lake Union. We don't have any parking, and it does really well. So, but this is not Seattle, obviously, so you need parking. But I hope that answers your question. I mean, it's really, you need to have, I would think, you want to have one per unit, and depending on what the code requires.
Yeah, the MUP has a lot more flexibility. It's a half unit or half stall per unit. It's supposed to be a transit-driven downtown, connected to the ferry and to the bus and the ground transportation. But the practical market reality is we don't think we're going to be able to get too far unless we have at least one stall per unit.
Mr. Chang?
The RFP mentions that as part of the project, the scope might include reaching out to property owners west of this lot. Have any overtures been made, and do you think that's a possibility?
Yes, and I would say that's happened. Again, it's difficult to engage in more substantive, discussions before we get, so we decided early on, even though the RFP does recommend that, and we did do that, we want to keep the focus on this footprint for the sake of this discussion, and hopefully if we develop some traction here, we'll be able to consider expanding the opportunities, but people have private property rights, so they can choose what to do what they want, but we'd like to explore if that makes sense to the other property owners as well. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, we're good with what we have right now.
Councilmember Ashby?
I know that there are many reasons why these would be rental units. I understand that. But I also know that in Olympia this year, there has been legislation that may, and I don't know where it stands, but that may reduce some of that liability so that condos would become a more viable opportunity. If that happened, would you consider making any of these units condos? So that they would be owner occupied?
I'd love to be able to build condos, but you can talk about the demand. The demand's certainly there for it, and you're correct. The Condo Defect Act or Condominium Act is really prohibiting what would otherwise be a burgeoning construction for the demand. And it's affordable housing too, isn't it? I mean, to be able to build condos. The other hurdle is financing. So I can't think of a lender right now, honestly, that would finance a condo project in anywhere but really the core markets of downtown Seattle and Bellevue. But it would be difficult.
It would also change your pro forma quite a bit, I'm assuming.
Oh, it would make it impossible, frankly, if we try to do that with this project. But hopefully, I mean, I would like to see that.
I mean, if that change took place and it's practical, that's something to consider, but that window might not open soon enough, I don't know.
Correct.
Question. Other questions? Thank you. This is, I'm really impressed with the work you presented tonight. Thank you. Give Brandy just a moment, and we'll get on to our business items. Okay, we're on to our business items. First is item 8A, adoption of an ordinance revising the Shoreline Master Program. Mr. Bond.
Yes, thank you. In October 2016 and March 2017, the City Council approved several revisions to the City's Shoreline Master Program to enhance the ability of downtown waterfront property owners to redevelop and improve their properties. Several housekeeping measures were also approved to ensure ongoing consistency with the 2016 Comprehensive Plan, the City's Permit Processing Ordinance and Development Regulations, and the Shoreline Management Act, and recommendations from reviewing agencies. These revisions were adopted in ordinance numbers 31-16, 32-16, and 11-17. In accordance with RCW 90.58090, the Department of Ecology is required to review the City's Shoreline Master Program amendments, provide comments and recommended revisions, and since then they've worked with staff on a final SMP amendment that will allow us to bring this process to a close. On January 24th, 2018, Ecology issued a conditional approval for the City Shoreline Master Program amendment subject to the revisions adopted by the ordinance that's before you tonight. And so the attached ordinance incorporates all of the recommended changes from the Department of Ecology.
So, Mr. Bond, can you just, we started this process, almost a year ago? And so we submitted a proposal to Ecology. Can you highlight the changes that they are asking from us?
You would put me on the spot after 2 years since we started this, wouldn't you? I think more than anything, when we sat down with the Department of Ecology, they really didn't have the context for what we were trying to accomplish. And really the issue was that we have buildings currently that are built within the 200-foot shoreline management area. And right now, the setbacks that we have adopted are preventing some older, worn-out buildings from being replaced because you could not replace them within the existing footprint. And so they had concerns about us not ensuring that new development conformed with those setbacks, and we essentially had to go through these areas one by one. And I apologize that the staff report didn't include this, but honestly, it's been so long since I've read their comment letter. It was last September that we met, that I don't remember the specific line item changes off the top of my head. So
This did a really good job.
let me.
Yeah, this was basically a body of work that if we hadn't pushed back on this, we wouldn't have been able to do anything with the existing properties that we had. And so Ecology, we recommended some changes. They pushed back on some items, and I'm not sure how much more we can push back to Ecology.
Yeah, so there was a Appendix B, which is a matrix that Ecology provided that was the recommended changes, and so there's an underline and strike through section that walks through all of that. But yeah, if you need a full explanation of this, I would have to probably do it in a study session or in a different setting.
So maybe if there's specific questions, we'll address those
Yeah.
one at a time. So with that, Councilmember Ashby.
Yes, I move to adopt an ordinance adopting the revisions to the Shoreline Master Program as presented.
Second.
A motion and a second.
And because I made the motion, I
You may
get to
ask the
talk
question.
first.
Yeah, you bet.
Having reviewed the ordinance, having reviewed the strike-through version and the details of attachment B, I'm very comfortable. I believe these changes allow us to do what we want to do with those waterfront properties, which is basically allowing a building that is already there to be able to update it, to be refurbished. Yeah, so I,
Built in with that existing footprint.
right, and rebuilt on that existing, and it goes into detail about the mitigation and that sort of stuff. But I was pleased with the outcome and wanted to compliment both our staff and Ecology for being able to work through this.
Other comments? Mr. Diener?
I was also happy with the collaborative effort between the Department of Ecology and staff, and usually when you take on issues like non-conforming structures, it gets people really excited and wound up, but we were able to work through those issues, and I think we have struck a good balance with the proposed code amendments in front of us.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Okay, you'll be voting on adoption of an ordinance revising the Shoreline Master Program. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. We are on to our second agenda item this evening, item 8B, adoption of a resolution declaring the winning response to the 640 Bay Street request for proposals.
14th, 2017, the City Council declared the property known as 640 Bay Street as surplus to the needs of the city. On November 19th, 2017, the city published a request for proposals for the sale and redevelopment of 640 Bay Street. The city only received one responsive proposal by the January 12, 2018 submittal deadline. This proposal was from Waterman Investment Partners, LLC. In accordance with the selection criteria and the methodology as stated in the RFP, the mayor convened a committee to review the proposal to determine whether it met the specific selection criteria. The mayor's selection committee has determined that the proposal submitted met the criteria as specified in the RFP. As such, I'm recommending that the City Council declare the response submitted by Waterman Partners, LLC as the winning response to the 640 Bay Street RFP, and authorize the mayor to negotiate for the sale and redevelopment of the property. The recommendation is to approve a resolution declaring Waterman Partners, LLC as the winning proposal.
Councilmember Chardy?
Mayor, I move to adopt a resolution declaring the proposal submitted by Waterman Partners LLC in response to the 640 Bay Street RFP as the winning proposal and to authorize the mayor to negotiate for the sale and redevelopment of 640 Bay Street.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion?
Can you tell us a little more about the proposal since we haven't seen it? Like number of pages, I understand that it addressed every aspect of the RFP, but can you fill us in
I can tell you what was not, you saw probably 60% of what was in the proposal on the screen tonight. They additionally submitted a floor plan layout showing the proposed configuration of the interior of the building. One thing that wasn't mentioned was that the library space, first of all, the Prospect Street elevation is about 18 feet above the Bay Street elevation. And so the proposal was for a fairly high ceiling first floor with a mezzanine in the library. So you would go up some stairs and there would be a mezzanine level as well as a ground floor level. The other neat thing was that the two buildings shared restrooms, and there was a pass-through so that if the library wanted to host an event, the restaurant potentially could cater that event, and there's the potential for some after-hours type activities at the library facility that were described. I think the other big portion of the document was about the financial ability to perform and the qualifications of the individual team members, and so there was a number of project examples that the team has completed in the past, as well as information about each of the team members and what sort of role they're going to play in the project. Finally, there was kind of the overall structure of what they're proposing in terms of an agreement, looking at what improvements are going to be made, whether it's to the Frederick Hill climb or other improvements, along with the money that would be paid to the city for the value of the property. And so that's all something that really needs to be negotiated and evaluated. One of the things that the mayor and I wanted to ask the council tonight was about how we want to determine the fair market value of the property. There's a couple of different ways that we can do that. We can hire an appraiser, and there's many different methods of appraisal. We can also get a statement or an opinion of value.
Yeah, it's a broker's, there's really two options, a broker's price opinion or an appraisal. And we have basically a piece of raw land that we had appraised when we acquired it at $150,000. You know, other than the real estate market has seen some appreciation, the site hasn't changed. We're not appraising an income property or a commercial space. An appraisal's probably gonna run us $6,000 or more. I would assume, maybe not quite that much, 5,000 or 6,000, and run in 2 or 3 months. I was told, we reached out to one appraiser that told us the soonest he could get to a project is May. I think we could be well served with a broker's price opinion, probably less than $1,000, and it's much simpler report. But I don't know that we need a whole lot beyond that for a raw piece of land. You know, some sales comparisons on other pieces of land in the area should provide us the information we need to move forward.
And
And we're not deciding the price tonight.
No.
That's something you'll be doing.
We'd have to, yes, negotiating. We're gonna need some sort of evaluation is a starting point. You've got the question about the vacation of the street and valuing that. And then the developer is proposing certain public amenities that they would like us to take into consideration. They're gonna construct, a set of stairs and a public plaza and gift that to the city. So there's some public benefit there too. So that is gonna be part of the negotiation process too.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that we balance, we create a balance sheet where these are the benefits to the city and these are the benefits to the developer, and that those things are roughly balanced in terms of the risk that they're taking and the benefits that the city is receiving as a result of the project. It's not as simple as just listing a property for sale and accepting a cash value for it. So the RFP goes into those details.
And for me, this is really, getting the first project out of the gate and setting the bar high. And I think the proposal has done that. And another important piece to this, though, is our design standards, and they'll be incorporated into this project. So, Mr. Diener, you had a question?
And some comments. So in my short 13 years here in the city of Port Orchard, this is one of the more exciting things to happen in our area. So I'm looking forward to it. I like the vision that they've shown on paper anyways. Are you asking that we consider whether we do an appraisal or a broker's report tonight?
I would like that, so
I
that we
think
So
can
I have a
move
follow-on
forward.
question if that's the case.
Okay.
Okay, so then can you tell a little bit more about what the broker's report includes? Is that just a market adjustment based on the prior
We
appraisal?
happen to
or-
have a real estate broker in the audience, and they could probably describe this better, but I'll give it a shot here. An appraiser is going to, there's 3 approaches: cost, the cost approach, the income approach, and what's the third approach, Gary? Replacement. The sales comparison, the replacement cost, and the income approach. Okay, and they're gonna average those and they're gonna come to a value. Okay, there's a very large body of work, and that report's gonna be about that thick. Okay, a broker's price opinion, we're gonna go to, probably 3 local brokers in the community, ask for a time frame. I think time is important in this, and a cost. And they're gonna do, look at comparable sales and give us an estimation of what they think the value of that piece of property. It's probably gonna be a page or 2 in a memo format.
Well, you actually have a broker's price opinion in your packet tonight.
Yeah,
It
the
was for the other item, and it's quite substantial.
Oh, okay. It's a heck of a lot less than an appraisal, though.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what we did for the library space versus that we're leasing. Excuse me, the space within the library that we're
It's a
leasing to
transit.
transit.
Yeah.
So that's a broker's price opinion. It's just, there's a lot less to it. And in this instance, when we don't have rents to consider, we don't have a building to replace, I think an appraisal's probably overkill.
I don't disagree.
So I think the question here is the resolution and whether we should do a broker's price opinion or an appraisal are two separate issues, but it's related obviously to the resolution. So by voting on the resolution, you're not making a decision on which one we should go with, but perhaps we can discuss it
But
afterwards.
you
or-
could include it, or you could make a separate motion to telling us which direction to go with how to value the property. So, Mr. Rosapuppy?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Wondering what timeline you were looking forward to for opening negotiations and concluding them?
I think the first step is we've got to value the property. I think there's, as Councilmember Chang alluded to, there's neighboring properties that, and our RFP asked that to be considered. I don't think they can have meaningful discussions with tenants or with neighboring properties until they control the site. So I'd like to say it's going to be 60 or 90 days, and I'll bring back an agreement. I took office 2 years ago, and I said Tremont project and revitalization of downtown were my #1 priorities. Well, we got Tremont underway, and 2 years later, we have our first proposal, for downtown. It hasn't happened fast enough for me, so.
That gives us an idea, that's all.
So as soon as I can possibly get it done, but I think we want to have a thorough process. We want to get valuable consideration for what the city has downtown, but we also want to get the best project we can get. And if it can be something more than what was presented tonight, I'm certainly open to that. Yes,
Just
Mr.
a
Charlie?
couple of comments. I'd just like to thank the presenters that presented tonight and moving forward on something that's been a long time in the works of creating a vision, creating a pilot project to try to spur some sort of moving downtown forward. And it takes a lot of faith for a group like this to come forward without having anything locked up. I mean, this is an abnormal real estate transaction. Normally you would move forward, you would put funds into escrow, and you would have an exclusive opportunity to do some preliminary design work, to do due diligence, and that's not what we asked for. And so I'm pretty impressed that we had a group like this come forward and to check the boxes that we have put together. I do understand that as they move into that next level, once they have the property locked up, they can move forward, that some of these things may adjust. But I think the theme of what they've created is exactly what we've been talking about for the last 2 years. And so I'm thankful we have these people that are willing to invest in our community. So thank you. And then on the broker's opinion, I think that's the right way to go right now. I would ask that maybe you bring that back to council before you finally ensue with final negotiations. But we are dealing with a raw piece of property, and we do know what we paid for it, and I think we can look at some trends as well. And so I think from the cost savings there, I think it makes sense.
So maybe it makes sense to take action on awarding the proposal now, that I'll work with Brandy to get quotes on a broker's price opinion and timeline, and I'll work to bring that back in 2 weeks for your approval of that contract for a broker's price, potentially a broker's price opinion. We could find out that none of I find it hard to believe, but maybe none of the brokers would want to do it, or the price isn't that much different than an appraisal. But my experience has told me that it will be, and we'll get it done much quicker, and that it's probably overkill for an appraisal. Yes, Councilmember Ashby?
I just would like to understand the process a little better. Again, I thank the people that presented tonight. I'm excited about it, and I applaud you and very much respect the leap of faith you took to put the energy that you have into this point. But there are some open questions still, such as parking. That's kind of a big one, and some other things. So you're going to negotiate with this group, but they're probably not going to take title until they know they can execute. So they can still walk away at some point, even though we have an agreement. I'm assuming that that will be part of the agreement, that the rest of these boxes have to be checked off first.
You're absolutely, we're gonna negotiate a purchase and sale with terms. They still have due diligence to do. They've expressed the desire to do a phase two. If they're gonna put $15 million building in our downtown, they wanna make sure that the dirt's not contaminated underneath.
Right.
So they're gonna need to solve their parking, and we're gonna want, I think step one is gonna be this purchase and sale agreement that is gonna have triggers. And it may, I'm not sure yet, as we work through this with legal staff, it may have a development agreement attached to it that has timelines, and measurables from our side. But that's kind of what I'm envisioning. I'm gonna be back with a purchase and sale agreement that's gonna have time, triggers to it and milestones.
My other question is, does the project then have to go to the hearing examiner?
I'm gonna defer to,
No, so this project is going to be submitted under the mixed-use pilot program, which the ordinance is already passed and it takes effect on April 2nd. So after April 2nd, somebody can submit an application for development under that program, and it's an administrative approval subject to SEPA review, and so there's a public process and review of environmental impacts of the project under SEPA. But if there's a development agreement attached to the application for development, the development agreement goes to the city council for a public hearing, and the city council makes the decision on the development agreement. The only time a development agreement would go to the hearing examiner is if it's tied to a quasi-judicial permit, like a subdivision or conditional use permit. So it's very likely that this could take the form of a development agreement and purchase and sale agreement, in which case there's a hearing on the development agreement. I believe there's also a required hearing on the sale of property.
yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure that particularly the audience was aware that the action we're taking tonight, there are still other steps before we're going to see a new building downtown.
Many more steps.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Chang?
I would echo every council member who's been excited. I think it's a very exciting project, and I think Bay Street is certainly deserving of something of the scope. I just have a couple of open questions, though, about the process so far. One is, can you tell us more about the review committee that looked at the proposal? Like, who was it?
It was myself, Mr. Bond, Mr. Dorsey, our attorney. He had a couple of other staff. Finance
That
director was in there. So primarily the
Okay.
directors and
On
myself.
the staff, okay.
And I would just add that the purpose of the committee, as the RFP was structured, was to evaluate competing proposals. In the absence of a competing proposal, the review was really to determine whether it met the standards of the RFP, not whether it was better or worse than an alternative proposal.
I think that's a good distinction to make for our purposes tonight, that we're really declaring this to be the winning RFP response.
And just then allowing me to start negotiations to figure out those details that will be brought back to the city council.
Now, is the proposal proprietary or confidential? Will we be able to see it at some point?
Yeah, no, it's available for viewing, and I think there was a disclaimer in the RFP that said that these are public documents, so.
Okay. Yeah, I saw the public disclosure portion, so I didn't know if we had to put in one to see it, or if council would be allowed to see it at
I
some
know
point.
the file was big. I'm not sure if it's something I can email or not, but I can get you a copy of it.
Okay, thank
Put it in
you.
your mailbox.
Okay. It's just that we're being asked to say that the proposal is the winning proposal, and I'm happy to do so. It's just that I have never seen it.
The other thing, since you were interested in the process, I thought I would add that this was advertised pretty extensively in the Daily Journal of Commerce out of Seattle. That is something that a lot of developers read, and so it ran for several days in that paper as well as both of our local papers.
Okay. Other questions? All right, we'll be voting on the adoption of a resolution declaring a winning response to the 640 Bay Street proposal, request for proposals. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None, the motion carries. All right, we are to 8C, adoption of a resolution approving a contract with Reed Middleton, Inc. for the Annapolis Creek Culvert Replacement 30% Design and Permit Coordination Project. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Your Honor. Council members, on August 18th, 2017, the city's Public Works Department published a request for qualifications for the Annapolis Creek Culvert Replacement Project, ad-ready design and permitting. By the September 8th, 2017 deadline, 6 statement of qualifications were received. On October 27th, 2017, the city interviewed the top 3 qualified firms, and based upon the qualifications received and the interview process, Reed Middleton was selected. On November 13th, 2017, Public Works staff met with Reed Middleton to discuss, clarify, and develop the project understanding. It was at that meeting that the city's desire to issue a contract for the preparation of the 100% ad-ready and permitting documents was determined to be unrealistic given the potential breadth of the project scope. Therefore, on January 12, 2018, the city received a defined scope of work for a 30% design with alternatives for legislative guidance and permitting coordination in an amount not to exceed $355,763. For fiscal impact, we had $400,000 that was allocated within the Storm Drainage Utility Fund for the originally conceived 100% ad-ready PS&E and permitting. It is now anticipated that this effort will require a total of approximately $650,000. So an additional $300,000 will be needed in the future to take the 30% design to 100% ad-ready document and permitting. The city will be pursuing grant opportunities for the additional $300,000 needed for the final design as well as construction funding. Therefore, staff's recommendation is to adopt Resolution 004-18, thereby approving Contract C01618 with Reed Middleton Incorporated for the Annapolis Creek Culvert Replacement 30% design and permitting coordination in an amount not to exceed $355,763 and documenting the professional services procurement process.
Okay, Councilmember Lucarelli.
I move to adopt a resolution approving a contract with Reed Middleton, Inc. for the Annapolis Creek Culvert Replacement 30% design and permitting coordination in an amount not to exceed $355,763 and documenting the professional services procurement procedures.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Just a little background here. We've been pursuing a number of grants for this particular project, and we just haven't competed well because we have, to this point, nothing much more than a wish sandwich. We know we got a project, but we don't have a concept or a design. So this allows us to do a 30% design with a goal. We'll eventually get to this 100% design, but now I believe we should compete much better for prospective grants to construct this particular project. So, we've been collecting the stormwater utility money, thinking we were going to get grants, competitive grants for some of the projects we want to complete, and I think we've got to have some designs on the shelf to be able to compete a little better for those grants. So. Just a little back, Mr. Dorsey.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remind the council and the audience that when we were required to initiate the MPDS Phase 2 permit, we have the compliance component, and that was the initial foray into it, was just permit compliance. And when we adjusted the stormwater utility rates, it was with that caveat that we would focus then that additional funding on capital projects. This is really, when this moves forward, this is really our second capital improvement project. I think it's important to recognize that on Tremont Street, as long as that's been one of the main thoroughfares into the city, there's not a catch basin out there. There's not any kind of a water quantity mitigation system in place. And, we have a westerly outfall to Ross Creek, that's a fish-bearing stream, and we have a outfall to the east to Johnson Creek, which is Port Orchard Boulevard, which is also fish-bearing. And with the Tremont project, the Storm Drainage Utility is contributing $600,000 or so to that project, and that really is it's a very significant collection, conveyance, water quantity for stream bank erosion and quality mitigation project. That's going to do nothing but enhance those two outfalls. In fact, we've already seen, even with construction, I think you saw the article in the Kitsap Sun last week where they were talking about the streams in the Sinclair Inlet were actually, they're starting to improve due to the MPDS program. And that's ultimately what that program is. It's to protect, you know, the Puget Sound, Sinclair Inlet. It isn't on-site mitigation necessarily. And so as painful as it was to put forth that unfunded mandate, it was good to see that there's actually, you know, results from that where, you know, people are basically being asked to be stewards for their impact on the environment. So Tremont has been actually our #1 capital improvement program project, and this is really embarking on the second.
Other questions for Mr. Dorsey? Yes,
I just-
Councilmember Ashby?
I just have a question in that our original $400,000 seemed like an appropriate number for the 100% design before, and now we have found out that that's not even close. My question is, how many other these culverts are we going to have to do? Seems to me there's a couple.
Yeah, well, first let me address, so when we did the initial 400,000, that was me reaching way back into a swag, scientific wild ass.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
As an engineer saying, okay, in my consultant world, you know, I think we can do this, but that was looking at the Annapolis Creek box culvert for its structural integrity, so it's a structural project, but then we knew we had the main sewer force line through it, so then it was a utility relocation dilemma. We knew we had the permitting aspect of it, but as I said, we'd gone into this hoping that we were gonna have
Some
a full design. What we ended up with was really a lot of questions. Questions about Arnold Street and the upstream and the watershed and a lot of ancillary aspects of this that we really need to nail down, and so this proposal has alternatives, and we'll come back, we're gonna meet with FEMA, we're gonna meet with the county, we're gonna meet with Fish and Wildlife, the Suquamish tribe. Ultimately, we'll come back with alternatives to say, which way do you want us to go? Because it could either be this project or it could be this project. And that's really the disparity in the first numbers. The only other box culvert that we're dealing with that we know of that was part of the injunction, the state injunction, is the box culvert at the base of Port Orchard Boulevard, which is a Department of Transportation culvert. I think it's down project 652. It's way down there. We know that at some point the state's going to have to take that 4x4 concrete box culvert and have it, just like they did in Gorst last year at Annapolis Creek, enhance that to a barrier-free culvert. At that time, the city will have to participate in the removal of 18 culverts going up Port Orchard Boulevard, because when they built that road in the 70s, they basically built the road down the middle of a stream. You don't do that anymore. And really the contractor, just to build the road, they just put in culverts to manage the flow, and we have 18 crossings. So the goal of that is someday, I probably won't be here, but I would love to see a project which is what we'll call Tremont Phase 2 or the Gateway Phase 2, which would have a roundabout at the top of Port Orchard Boulevard, at the bottom of Port Orchard Boulevard. It would be a complete reconstruction of the road with water, sewer, storm drainage. We would probably take those 18 crossings and take it to 3 fish barrier-free crossings and then rebuild the stream and the riparian habitat. It'd be a wonderful project. But that's going to be, and we met 5 years ago with a number of stakeholders, and Ecology was very excited, and we called it the One Solution type project. So that won't happen until the Department of Transportation suddenly takes our project and says, okay, we're moving forward. And at that point, we're going to have to address the upstream. So as beautiful as Port Orchard Boulevard is, it's a liability from the public works standpoint, because it's going to be a major major project someday in the future, but we might also make a positive out of it by having, in a roundabout at both ends, if anybody's tried to take a left, westbound at the base of Port Orchard Boulevard, or even getting out of Cheers at times, we desperately need intersection control, so that's a functional level of service. And that's the only other one, other than if there happens to be a culvert, for example, at our Clifton Anderson Hill roundabout. So far, we haven't touched that culvert, but sometimes when you just touch a culvert, the one on Salmonberry, there's a culvert under the Salmonberry when we had that flooding, because that's a fish-bearing stream. If somebody touches that culvert, it will have to change. But those are they're not cheap to fix, but you're talking about putting in an arch pipe or a box culvert. It's not what we're dealing with on Annapolis or at the end of Port Orchard Boulevard.
Okay, thank you.
Take them on one at a time
Yeah.
as they come up. Other questions or comments? Okay, do we have a motion? Was there a motion?
And a second, and a
Okay.
second.
Mr. Dorsey went on so long, I forgot. All right, we'll be voting on.
It was fascinating.
It was.
You'll be around, Mark.
All right, you'll be voting on the adoption of a resolution approving a contract with Reed Middleton, Inc. for the Annapolis Creek Culvert Replacement, 30% design and permit coordination project. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. We are on to 8D, approval of a lease agreement with Kitsap Transit to lease a portion of 87 Sydney Avenue, which is in the library. Reinerson?
Yes, good evening, Mayor, Council. So the city owns the building located at 87 Sydney Avenue. The facility is being occupied by the Kitsap Regional Library, Port Orchard Branch, and Kitsap Transit. Kitsap Transit has leased the 475 square foot consisting of an office space for staff, workshop, and bathroom since 1995. This is an ideal location for Kitsap Transit as it is adjacent to the Port Orchard passenger-only foot ferry dock. The current monthly lease amount is $458.33. Upon expiration of the agreement, staff sought an appraisal to determine the current market lease value of the space. The appraisal report dated January 8th, 2018, and is included as part of the council packet, determined that the current fair market rent for this space would be $513 per month. The new agreement reflects the current fair market rent value with a term of 5 years with 3 options to extend for additional 5 years. Staff recommends approving the lease agreement as presented.
One correction to this, we used a broker's price opinion and not an appraisal for this valuation. So, is there a motion or question? Mr. Diener?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve a lease agreement with Kitsap Transit for a portion of the facility located at 87 Sydney Avenue, as described in the lease agreement presented.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion of the lease? This has taken quite a while to do. We actually had to have it, the broker's price opinion updated. Our attorney and their attorney were batting this back and forth for some reason, but it's done.
I just have a question. I'm fully in support of this because I think transit, I love the way they have the hub downtown, but is there any reason we wouldn't put this 475 out to bid and see what the market would bear? I mean, what if somebody wanted to put something else there and would offer us more money? Are we not allowed to take that?
We could. It's a bathroom and a kitchen space. It's not like it's.
I know it's only 475 square feet, but still.
It's really tiny, and I think it's pretty vital to transit when they're. I mean, it's our transit hub downtown, and it's where the drivers need to be able to get off the bus for a moment and use the restroom facilities and take a break. So it's pretty important, I believe, to what's happening. I think there's going to be an opportunity to look at that site if the 640 Bay Street happens, and maybe transit has a bigger role in that, or it's something completely different at that site. So, good question. Other questions? Okay. We have a motion and a second. Be voting on the approval of a lease with Kitsap Transit for a portion of 87 Sydney Avenue. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. We are to our last business item on the agenda, the 8E, which is the approval of the January 23rd council meeting minutes.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the council meeting minutes of January 23rd as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay, and I'm probably going to hear two abstentions, one from Mr. Kachardi and one's from Mr. Diener, I would imagine. So all in favor of approving the January 23rd council meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And none, and two abstentions? Okay, meeting minutes are approved. We are going to go into a 10-minute executive session pursuant to RCW 40.30.110. We will be discussing a pending litigation and briefly talking about labor negotiations. So, Mr. Diener, you get to join us for the first part, and then you get to come out and recuse yourself.
Take and smoke.